using a compliant product, we distribute that potable drinking water throughout the community, we collect the wastewater, we convey the wastewater to the treatment facility, we process that to meet or exceed environmental safety standards, so we can distribute that back out as irrigation water to the community. In addition to doing these processes at Ave Maria, we also have a contract operation deal with Collier County Public School System, because they have 4 schools that are far enough off grid that they have to have their own water and wastewater treatment facilities, so we also operate and manage those. Each one of these processes is monetized. We sell the drinking water, we charge to process the wastewater, and we sell the irrigation water. So, you know, we get to charge for it 3 times. So how do we do it? Well, we have 3 wells with submersible pumps that pull water out of the lower Taniani aquifer. It's about 60 foot down. We then treat the water to remove minerals such as magnesium and calcium, which you commonly refer to as hardness, viruses, bacteria, as well as tannins and other color creating agents. We do this with a process known as membrane filtration, commonly referred to as RO or reverse osmosis. This slide shows where our 3 wells are that we use for potable water. And well 1 at the very top, that one is on site at the plant. Well 2 is at the far end of the plant. And then well 3 is off site down the road.
That's a mobile gas station by number 1.
Yep.
Yeah, and the leader.
Yeah.
And we got a little video here that kind of shows you how it works. And we also brought a cutaway. This is actually a cutaway of a reverse osmosis membrane. Reverse osmosis is really not a filter. Filters take water through it, and anything that can't pass gets caught on the outside. You'll see in the video that that's really not how this process works.
Reverse osmosis works by forcing water through a special plastic membrane sheet to remove compounds such as salts, organic compounds, microorganisms, viruses, and pharmaceuticals. Rolls of membrane sheets are wound into cylinder-shaped elements. There are several elements inside each long-pressure vessel. As water enters the vessel, it flows over the membrane surface as it moves from one end of the vessel to the other. The membrane layer is extremely thin. It allows water to pass through or permeate, while preventing other compounds from passing through. Membranes remove molecules based on their size, shape, and charge. Generally, contaminants larger than water molecules will not pass through, including most chemical contaminants and all microorganisms such as viruses and bacteria. 2 streams of water are produced. Pure, clean water, or permeate, flows across the membrane sheets and passes through the membrane layers to the inside core tube. Water that does not permeate becomes more highly concentrated with salts and other substances. This water is called concentrate. The pure permeate water flows out the core tube and one end of the pressure vessel, and the concentrate water flows out another outlet. The concentrate water can then flow into other pressure vessels for the same process to happen again, so even more pure permeate water can be recovered. About 82% of all the source of water becomes purified water.
So they're talking about how we take the concentrate out and then run it through a vessel again, and that's exactly what we do. That's multi-stage treatment. So think about like when you were a kid making lemonade with your mom. You get to squeeze the lemon, well then your mom would take it and she would get more out. And that's exactly what we're doing with the water. I mean, same deal. So this is actually our well water. This is what comes straight out of the ground. And then we run it through the RO, and this is the concentrate water. This is what we get when we squeeze all the stuff out that we don't want. And that produces this as our product water. This is what we send out to the community to sell. And we can have our membranes designed to remove a number of different things. So it starts here with basically just pleated paper cartridges and works its way all the way over to the very far side would be true reverse osmosis, but we don't run true reverse osmosis because we're not trying to remove salt. That's the main reason that you're using that is for desalination. And it just costs more to do that, one, and then two, everybody says, well, why wouldn't you just take everything out? Well, if we take everything out, then you're just left with H2O, just pure water. That in itself is very, very corrosive. It will, if, for instance, if you were just to continually drink straight RO product water without putting anything back in it, without any remineralization, it would start pulling those minerals that the water wants. It becomes very aggressive. It'll start pulling it out of you. It would actually be very harmful to your body over long term to do that. One of the reasons we don't want to take everything out is we have a thing that we try to base everything on called the Langolier Saturation Index. And what that is we have scale forming and we have corrosive. Well, we always want to be just a little to the scale forming side. So, and the reason for that is, I'm sure everybody's heard of Flint, Michigan. Well, the whole deal there is, the not getting too deep into it, but just the nuts and bolts of that was, you had some mid-level politician over here, non-elected official, that was looking at line items in a budget and telling the guys at the water plant, you can't run this corrosion inhibitor anymore because I did some research and you don't need it. You got 70, 80, 100-year-old lead and copper lines in the ground, and now you have no buffer there. There's no more scaling going on. So the water becomes aggressive and it's pulling the minerals that it needs out of that old pipe, and it becomes part of your distribution system. At Ave Maria, we don't worry too much about that because everything that we have is no more than about 11 years old in the ground. Everything is plastic. So we don't have to worry too much about that, but we do still have to worry about what's in your home. If your home is plumbed in copper, if that commercial business down the road is plumbed in copper, we still have to make sure that the water does not become aggressive on that, because we do have to sample for that annually. And that's the only samples that we have to do, that we have to rely on somebody else to pull, which is really scary. We basically have to put together a kit, send it to the homeowner with instructions, and go home and pray that they actually follow those instructions, because there's a pretty specific way that you have to pull those samples. It's the only water sample that we pull from inside of the dwelling. Everything else we do comes from outside. You guys got any questions on that thus far?
How many homes are sampled?
DEP tells us that, and they base it on capacity and how many homes that we have in the community. So they will tell us that you need this percentage, and we have to actually submit a sample plan to them, and it'll be, that address will be forever.
And then do you sample the water at the schools, or is the
Yes.
school?
Yeah, but because the schools are a little different. The schools are kind of odd in the fact that we don't have what we call a distribution system there. The school itself is the only point of entry for our entire water plant there, so I have to sample those independently. And because their staff will just, they won't do it, they just give us access and we go in and do them. The ones that we operate water plants at, we go in and do our flushing the day before and then come in, because part of the lead and copper sampling is the sample is supposed to be pulled first draw. And in any commercial or industrial building, it's very difficult to ensure that. So usually I'm there at 7 o'clock in the morning pulling samples at the schools.
Before anybody shows up?
Yeah. So,
You guys have to replace those,
yes.
We just did.
oh,
The first round lasted about 10 years,
oh,
about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But we weren't running it very long during the day either. We were only running 4 or 5 hours a day for a long time.
Yeah, as the capacity demand increases, then the usage on the membranes increases. But actually, those would be happier running 24 hours a day than on, off, on, off, on, off. Usually any of our membrane technologists, our membrane engineers, they cringe when, like, especially, that's actually from one of the schools, that's from the water plant at Sable Palm Elementary. It's a very small one. The ones that are at the Ave plant are about this big around. We didn't want to bring one of those up here today. But they cringe every time I tell them how we have to cycle those on and off there, and they're like, just turn it on and let it run. And it's like, well, we can't,
well, yeah,
for a number of reasons, because we're also operating a wastewater plant there, and all that concentrate goes to the wastewater plant. We'll get into that later, but a wastewater plant wants stuff to feed the microbiology. A wastewater plant is basically a biome, so when you're just flushing water that has no nutrients in it for the bacteria, then it creates issues on that side too, so compliance is really hard. So
Kudos
it's
to
a
you
balancing
guys,
act.
kept it going during Irma even, right?
Yeah, that actually is on one of our slides coming up, but yeah, we can get into that. Hurricane Irma, we were the only, utility in Collier County that did not lose service or go on a precautionary boil water notice. And we were the only utility in Collier County that did not have any sewer spills or overflows, DEP calls them SSOs. And at one point, because what we do, this really is a pretty incestuous industry. Everybody knows everybody. We were actually getting calls to help some of our colleagues at the larger utilities, so we were actually providing resources to help them stay in service during post-Irma as well.
Yeah, we
with
were.
Collier County and stuff, so.
I let Carter County borrow a 1,000-gallon fuel tank, and they gave us like 1,500 gallons of unleaded and another 1,000 gallons of diesel to trade.
Yeah.
So we were bartering like that during Hurricane.
Who has water and
I had a
who
trailer, I
has
had a tank, they had
And,
gas?
and part of the reason that we were able to do that is because of the BCC, interoffice, so to speak, camaraderie. Because of the issues that the Grove had, they knew that it was pointless for them to start running pumps, so Bobby said, come get the fuel, whatever you need, come get it. So Tim and I were shuttling diesel in our trucks from the Grove over to the water plant to keep the water plant running.
Wow.
So, we were all there.
Yeah.
We had people that actually spent the night, stayed on site at the plant. I live in Lehigh, and my wife's actually got videos of me leaving with the tailgate down on my truck because I had about that much pine needles in the back of my truck. At 10 o'clock the next morning, once I knew my house was in good enough shape, I got generator running, my family was safe. 10 o'clock the next morning, I was on my way out here. It normally takes me about an hour to get to Ave, it took me 3.5. I had water over the Silverado emblem on my truck for 2.5 miles to get out of my neighborhood. Hit dry ground for about 2 miles, and then I had enough water that if I didn't have four-wheel drive, I would have ended up floating off in the canal, but because I had four-wheel drive, the front tires could pull me through over to the bridge going down Sunshine, which is the only road out of my neighborhood. So, but we were here every day, making sure that it was all up and operational. And we made, I made that trip out here every day. Tim made the trip out. The biggest issue for us was communication, so we just went old school. We got a whiteboard, so that was our pager.
Everybody had to meet at a certain time.
Yeah.
Discuss it.
If we had an issue, you just write it up there, take care of this, and then, hey, we took care of this, or we'll get to it, or whatever. Our whiteboard was full, but for a week and a half, that's how we communicated at Ave, and it worked fine. Probably one of the biggest issues for me is on the compliance side of it, is we're required to report even in a situation like that, either between 24 and 48 hours, depending on what it is. Where our servers went down, we couldn't email. So that was a big issue for us. So everything had to be phoned in to the state, and because all of our agencies that we deal with locally were also closed, everything went to a central repository in Tallahassee. So it took us about 2 months to get all that sorted out, where everybody is trying to say, well, you didn't report this, you didn't report that, you didn't call this in. It's like, so I'm sending them screenshots of my phone logs and all that. So that was probably one of the larger issues for us, but I know in talking with Jared that we've fixed that.
Yep.
So we should be, the next one, knock on wood, we should be in good shape. The way that storm came through, the plant never really saw the eye. The plant sat in the eye wall for an hour and 15 minutes because of the way that it was kind of, had a little curve to it there. They just stayed in the eye wall for a little over an hour, but never got the eye, so.
We weren't sure it was gonna stay together, but we had a concrete box we could get in if we needed to. Like 3 of the
Oh,
offices are,
really?
yeah, 3 of the offices are concrete encased. Yeah.
It's good to know.
The water was pouring through the walls and the doors, and we had to keep the wet dry back to keep the water out. It was exciting,
Was, yeah, well,
What's the lot combinations we can do there? If you can get there.
Well, and me being the one coming in from outside, you know, just watching that on the news, I was terrified driving in. And then some of the damage that I seen coming in, you know, nobody's answering phones, nobody's returning any texts or anything, and then when I come around the corner and I hit my opener on the visor and the gate open, and it's like, oh, thank God. You know, so it was, I was prepared for the worst. I mean, but we all left that way. You know, I had all my tools in the house because I didn't know, because where I live, it's 100+ foot pine trees all the way around my lot. So I didn't know which vehicle I was gonna have to take. I knew I was gonna have to come to work, but then, you know, whether it was my work truck, my personal vehicle, my wife's vehicle, whichever one didn't have a tree on top of it, you know, so I loaded everything, company equipment, personal equipment, everything I had in there that I might need, and I actually had to stop in 2 spots on my way in and saw trees out of 82 so I could get in, so. You know, so it was pretty tedious, but
Emotional, it was emotional.
it was, you know,
PTSD.
but we proved that we could do it, and, you know, like I said, we were very proud of the fact that the larger municipalities that are usually running around pounding their chest were calling us saying, hey, can we borrow this, do you have this, what can we do, and stuff like that. All of us here have been around the industry for a while, and like I said earlier, it's pretty incestuous. Jason, Tim, Paul, Ray, they all came from CH2M Hill, which is now Jacobs, which is one of the larger companies in the world that does what we do contract-wise. I came from Severn Trent, which is it's a British-based company that's I think the number 4th largest worldwide doing what we do. And so just being around on that and being bounced from project to project to project when we were with those types of companies, we know everybody that does what we do in this state. So that makes it nice, because if we were in the same position, we could have been the ones making the phone calls, well, I need help, you know. And we know the ones to call that would say, come get what you need. So that part's nice. So, any other questions so far? Jared, how come it always comes up and says I'm connecting to Team Server? It doesn't let me do anything else.
I don't know.
It's in sleep.
So how do we know the water we send out is safe? Well, once the water's treated and then stabilized, like we said, we have to make sure it's got the proper balance of minerals in it. Stabilized to the desired pH, hardness, and alkalinity. Chlorine is added as a disinfectant. We use a chloramine disinfectant to reduce disinfectant byproducts as well as taste and odor issues. And what that means is if we just use straight chlorine, we would be relying on a chloride ion to provide disinfection, but we're using a chloramine ion, and in order to achieve that, we actually mix it with a small dose of ammonia. And the benefit to that is, as it says, we reduce our potential for disinfectant byproducts, which are fun things like arsenic that pop up in your water. So, and you don't get the taste and odor from the chlorine. That helps mask it a little bit. So that's something that we use that for. We have to check residual continuously at the plant. There's instrumentation that continuously monitors that and records it 24/7, 365. And then every day, our operators and our distribution team are out in the field pulling random samples from all over that have to be reported. And we have to pull microbacteriological samples routinely, and those go into a third-party lab to Sanders. And they actually take them and put them in a petri dish in a culture that is conducive to growth, and they incubate for 24 hours. And if we have anything pops up, then we have to report it, and we have to resample, we have to figure out where our problem is. And if we don't, which we generally don't, then we can just move on, but we have to report those results either way to DEP. And that's, we have to report those monthly if they're good, and if they're bad, we have to report them immediately, and then we end up having to do resamples. We have to do, so like sometimes you'll get something where it comes up, you know, precautionary boil water notice. Doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong, it just means that just what it says is precautionary. So, hey, this came up, so we have to do 2 extra days of sampling here just to make sure everything's good. So in the meanwhile, you know, we would prefer that you do this just to ensure that there are no issues. Knock on wood, we've never had an issue, so. We provide an average of 430,000 gallons of potable water to the community per day. We've won multiple awards, including best tasting water in the state twice. It's the only plant that I've ever worked at that's won that award twice, so we're pretty proud of that. As we said, we were the only ones that didn't lose service during Irma. We stored about 1.5 million gallons of water on site to maintain a level of preparedness for water main breaks, fires, or other issues that place an abnormal demand on our system. And that's really important, especially with all the construction that we have going on, because it doesn't take much. You know, if we have one of those excavators out there, pulls up a 12-inch line, it's not gonna take much. That 1.5 million will be down to about 500,000 gallons in less than an hour.
I have a good example. They were pressure washing on a Sunday, and the pressure washing truck was a big truck backed into a hydrant and pulled forward and ripped it off the 6-inch main. So we were losing 6,000 gallons a minute. By the time we responded and got the water shut down, it was almost 45 minutes later. So we had about 30-foot tank, we lost more than 10 feet of that 30-foot tank.
Wow.
And so that's, we make sure that we maintain that all the time so that we can deal with it if it happens, because it's a matter of when, not if. I mean, it's gonna happen, so.
Who paid for that water bill?
I think they charged the person that hit the fire hydrant. Yes. I don't know how they did that.
This is by a gas station.
Yes,
Yep.
JL 23. There was a police report. Good question. You don't know the answer?
County.
I figured it was in the district.
Okay, I don't know. It's a water though, not irrigation. So AMOC would pay for it.
Yeah,
Or they would have
I mean,
to
and
collect
that's more of a Jason or Tammy question, but generally, like you said, you know, something like that with a police report, you know, we can look on what we call our SCADA system at the plant and see our water loss, and we can estimate how much we lost from that, and that will be part of what goes into an insurance claim, you know, along with that police report, so.
That's how we figure out the flushes on the new mains with the contractors. The plant will tell us how much water we use, and we charge Jensen for that.
Let's call it.
So what do we do with it after you use it? Well, once used by the consumer, the water comes back to Ave Maria Utility Company as raw wastewater to be treated. The raw wastewater is conveyed through a network of gravity sewer lines, pumping stations called lift stations, and pressurized sewer lines called force mains, which are mapped on our next slide. Which is, I hope it turns out good, because Jason actually sent me that at 6 o'clock last night. I just added it in this morning. And we have 20 lift stations throughout the community right now, and they collect the raw wastewater and pump it back to the wastewater treatment facility. And this doesn't show our gravity lines. This is just our pressure mains and our pump stations. The little yellow boxes are all the lift stations. And this is actually a better map. The one that we had didn't have any of the development over here, so it was definitely a very old and outdated map, so we just put this one together, so.
So as those communities grow out there, you'll have to add more.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and that's on the developer's shoulders to do. They do that, and we get into that later too, in Tim's section on all the stuff that they do, but some of what Tim takes care of is, inspecting and accepting all of that stuff as they're adding in, you know, it has to meet our specs for our system.
Priscilla had a question.
I have a quick question. So in an Ave Maria home, from your faucet to your toilet is RO water.
Yes.
What about your irrigation?
Irrigation is separate, and
So that pulls from a completely different.
Yep.
Different meter,
Yep.
different pipes.
Yep, that's actually what we do with this water, is we turn it into irrigation water.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep.
Okay.
So, why do we treat the wastewater? I mean, we got tons of wetlands over there. I mean, you got Gargiulo across the street. They'd probably love for us to just pump it out on the tomatoes, right? So why treat it? Well, one, for pollution prevention. So, this is one of Tim's favorite slides. This came out of our old presentation. Anybody have an idea where that's at?
Let's see.
Cape Coral.
No, it's not local. That is actually Guanbaro Bay. That is where the sailing event happened during the Rio Olympics.
About a year before it happened.
Oh,
They cleaned it up,
Rio.
obviously.
Oh, they were talking talking about that.
One of the other reasons we do that is for human health and safety. And this is a very short list of all the fun stuff that we are actually exposed to every day out there dealing with this. And, you know, we want to make sure that it is treated in such a way that this does not become a major issue, you know. I mean, when we go to these third world countries and stuff, these are every day for people there because they don't have good treatment. And then, of course, the environmental health and safety. This one is Cape Coral.
Yeah.
So
It's a raw subject right
Yeah.
any of the video footage, you know, that we got to give props to Rockstar Productions starring Jared.
Oh, was that your drone?
Yeah, this is
All
Jared.
right,
Jared
Jared.
provided this footage.
now. He was screaming a little bit being that high.
As he was hanging off
Yeah.
from the
I
plane.
didn't think the balloon was big enough, but
You gotta go.
Wow.
but that's our treatment facility. That's what we have right now, and you see that it's right next to a nice pristine body of water, and we've never had an issue with that. We're pretty proud of that as well.
So you guys have some green stuff too.
That's
Well,
healthy
that
use
is
stuff.
actually just a basin that is offline for redundancy. We're required to make sure that we have some redundancy. So that basin is actually just rainwater, and that's just duckweed that's accumulated in that rainwater.
We try to have two of everything.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yep, so like if we have to get into this basin here, because you see all the air bubbling up, so we've got diffusers on the very bottom of that. So if you know, there was an issue with those diffusers and we had to take that offline, we'd have to put the other one online. But because it's really its own little biome, we wouldn't be able to just turn one off and turn the other one on. You know, we have to get it all acclimated and get the bacteria doing what we want it to do. So, but we achieve all this through wastewater treatment.
That's not Jason.
So, I tried to keep the condensed version as short as possible because I can really nerd out over wastewater treatment. But the first thing that we do,
We like to, yeah, anybody want some Tootsie Rolls? Chris?
yeah, it needs some sugar, a little bit of sugar rush here. So,
Sounds good enough?
bunch of sissies. First we remove
Sure,
all
come
of
on,
the
be sport, good.
all of the non-wastewater materials such as wipes. There is absolutely no such thing as a process-friendly flushable wipe.
You have to be chewing on something when you watch this.
Tampon applicators, diapers, construction debris, condoms, wax paper, plastic, dentures, yes, that happens.
You
Ginge.
guys want some?
3 times in my career, I have gotten a phone call at the plant saying, hey, can you watch for my dentures coming through? I'm like, that's not how this works. And any other whatever that ends up in the wastewater stream that doesn't readily break down the water. And then we got a little video here showing some of the stuff. There's a bazillion videos online showing what this one shows, but we picked this one. I picked it for 2 reasons. One, it's close to home. It's Miami-Dade. And 2, one of the girls in it was one of my students for wastewater, so.
It's quite a reminder to think before you flush. The way we choose to dispose of personal wipes has become a public problem.
The so-called flushable ones, officials say, actually have no place in our pipes. CBS 4's Francis Wang explains why.
You flush your wipes down the toilet. Now where does it go? The journey of your wipes start with the pipes under your home, where Miami-Dade Water and Sewer Department crews use these tiny robot cameras to get in and look for problems.
The grease and wipes, you know, that they go down the toilet. That's what creates,
Like Tootsie
you
Roll?
put all that together.
All that together becomes rags, items that the department says don't break down in sewer water. Items like paper towels, clothing, hair, female products, hygiene products, and wipes, both non-flushable and flushable. Now, there's no way to tell if the wipes are the flushable ones or not once they go down your toilet. But they'll go from the pipes to the pump stations.
There's no telling what else we'll find.
Randy Irian has seen a lot in his nearly 2 decades working as a plant mechanic.
When I started here 18 years ago, we come maybe once a month.
Wow.
And unclog one of the pumps. And it's just slowly gotten more and more often. Like I say, 3 times a week sometimes.
These pumps pumps are an important part of the process, and pressure is needed to push the sewer water through. If your wipe hasn't been caught yet, it'll end up here, a wastewater treatment plant.
Like you see the stuff hanging from the one that is going out.
Yes.
That's rags too.
Now, I know this looks like a lot, but think about this. It's just a small fraction of the 300 tons of rags built up in just 1 month.
And it's going to cost you, the customer. It costs about $200,000 a year to haul the rags at the pump stations and treatment plants to the landfill so they can be disposed of properly. Last year, the department spent more than $525,000 to unclog upwards of 650 blockages within the thousands of miles of sewer lines in the department system. At about $2.7 million a year for labor, materials, and tools, that's nearly $3.5 million. More money going down the drain.
Stop and change your habits just so that it protects you and your wallet.
Companies like Kimberly-Clark say their flushable wipes are not part of the rags problem, and that blaming flushable wipes for sewer blockages is like blaming cyclists for downtown traffic. In fact, they say people flushing non-flushable wipes is why they introduced flushable ones in the first place. But water and sewer managers don't buy it.
Even if the wrapper on the packaging of the items that you have say flushable, we're asking that you don't flush it down the drain. Because out of sight is not out of mind. These items are not breaking down fast enough.
And so, the fight over flushable wipes continues.
The only things you should be flushing down your toilet is number 1, number 2, and toilet paper. Nothing else. No matter what the wrapper says, just stop the clog and dump it in the trash.
Francis Wang, CBS 4 News.
And like Tim and I tell the kids when we do tours at the Ave plant for the schools and for AMU, you know, it's the 3 Ps. You know, it's the pee, it's the poop, and the paper. If it doesn't fall apart when it's wet, then it's not going to process in our system. Our system's a lot smaller than Miami-Dade's, clearly. So currently, we spend around $10,000 a year dealing with this. But as the system grows and the age increases, that number is going to go up. Fortunately, we're not as old as some of the antique systems over, especially like in Britain. So like, for instance, not too long ago, they had a 600-ton grease blob that they had to pull out in Cardiff, Wales. Or 800-ton, excuse me. And that's, so it's not just the wipes that we worry about and the diapers and the hygiene products. It's when you're scraping your stuff in the sink, you know. Garbage disposals are the worst things ever because you're putting all kinds of like food products in there that will break down a little bit, but they break down into grease, and that creates issues both in the collection system and also for the treatment as well, because we can't treat grease. Part of our process requires that the surface of our water can aspirate, so if we've got a layer of grease over that, you know, then it can't aspirate properly.
And in Ave Maria, we have 128,443 feet of gravity sewer, which is 24 miles.
20 miles.
Of pipe, but we gotta take care of it.
So, once the floatables and unprocessable material is removed, the raw wastewater is introduced to the mixed liquor, or MLSS, in an aeration basin. This is where the fresh, raw wastewater becomes food for our biomass that is teeming with beneficial microbacteria. High volume blowers feed air through diffusers to the aeration basin. The ammonia in the wastewater is converted there. The air that we add combines with the ammonia and other elements to become nitrite, nitrate, and hydrogen sulfide gas. The hydrogen sulfide gas is the rotten egg smell that you get. You know, that's the reason that you lock the windows when you're driving down the road with the family. But everybody thinks that our raw water, our raw wastewater is like disgusting and black and brown and whatever, but this is actually a video of our raw wastewater being introduced to the plant. It is less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% solids when we get it.
A lot of water.
Yeah. Microbiology is fed by diffused air, and it does a majority of the work. Our job is to maintain the process water parameters to maintain a conducive atmosphere for biological activity. Parameters such as dissolved oxygen content, pH, alkalinity throughout the process, sludge age, sludge volume, and predominant microbiological organisms must be monitored diligently. The reason it's important to mention alkalinity throughout the process is usually you'll have good alkalinity at the front and at the back, but in the middle it can change, and the reason for that is, again, this is a completely biological process. One of the things everybody's worried about now with water quality is nutrients, you know, so the nitrate removal is how we do that. Like we said in the last slide, we use air, we add that O2 to the NH4 and we strip that all apart. So now we end up with NO2 and NO3. So we have, in order to make that conversion, we use 7.3 pounds of alkalinity for every 1 pound of ammonia that we converted. So we've lost a whole bunch of alkalinity, but I still have to have alkalinity throughout the system because alkalinity is basically a measure of a solution's ability to buffer acid. So if we have changes in the pH coming in and we've lost all of our alkalinity, it could be catastrophic. So we have to be able to maintain that throughout the process. But we don't want it to be too high because once we get to a different portion of the process, we actually gain it back when we convert the nitrite and nitrate to atmospheric nitrogen and oxygen. But it's different bugs, so again, we have to make it so that the bugs we want to work in a certain portion of the process are the ones that can live there happily. We deal with the fact that even a minor upset or change in any of these parameters can have detrimental impacts to the final product water's ability to be compliant. And then this is a video that shows under microscope slides some of the bacteria that we look for when we're looking under a microscope to actually make sure that we have what we want, because there's actually bad bacteria that we can find too. So usually if we're having an upset in the plant that we can't easily troubleshoot based on what we see on our instrumentation, we are pulling microscope slides and trying to see what our predominant bacteria is. And usually it ends up being something related to too much grease in the system. If you end up with what we call filamentous bacteria, because the grease doesn't allow the proper respiration and aspiration throughout the process.
These are the unrecognized staff.
Yeah, these.
They're alive.
They do all the hard work. I mean, they are. I mean, it really is a living biome.
It's cool.
And
Ooh,
so
little monsters.
we have to.
We get slides, we can look at them from the plant live. They don't-
Sean, you got a question back here?
I know you guys said that you've been in this industry for many years. What's your education for something like this? Like, I know per plant, they probably train you, but what is your education like? That doesn't mean anything to me. It means a lot to you.
In order to get the lowest license class that you can have for what we do, and we actually get into that in a little bit too, but there's 3 different licenses for what we do. There's wastewater treatment plant operator, drinking water plant operator, and then distribution system operator licenses available for our industry. And then each one of those has 3 different levels. So to get the lowest level of any of those, you have to spend 2,080 contact hours in a facility, which is basically 52 40-hour weeks. So before you can even sit for your test, you have to have that in so that you can get your license. So the hope is that you're someplace where you're actually getting well trained on that. It doesn't always happen. One of the issues that we face is an industry is there's one company in the state that had spent years lobbying and successfully got what they had asked for in setting up a prison training program for what we do. And so they hire directly from the prisons. Well, the prisoners are not allowed to actually do any of this contact work. So their time in the plants is signed off on for weed eating and painting and general housekeeping. So, but they come out of prison, depending on how bad they were and how long they were in there, you know, they come out of prison with a Class A license, which in the real world is, you know, that's, guys should know everything and has been in several different plants and big plants and little plants, and meanwhile, they've never been anywhere other than this little 50,000 gallon a day plant in a prison, and they can't pass a background check, so most people can't hire them except for this one company that specifically lobbied to have this happen. So it's really flooded the market with unqualified people. I go out of my way. I was at Collier County Utilities for a while. I created the curriculum that they use currently for their trainee program on the wastewater side. I am of the mindset that everybody around me should know what I know at work, you know. A lot of people have the philosophy that knowledge is power, I'm gonna keep all the knowledge, and I don't feel that way. I think everybody above me and everybody below me should know what I do and how I do it. And so as such, I try to push that on everybody. We have a couple trainees at the Ave plant right now, and you know, I've sat down with them. I'm actually getting ready to work with one of Tim's guys that's getting ready to go take his distribution license, so he's struggling with the math, and what we do is actually very math heavy, you know, so I'm gonna sit down and go over that with him, and you know, it really just depends on where you're at and what you really get for training. Once you get further up, you know, a lot of places, you know, they look for 2 or 4 year degrees in environmental science, microbiology, chemistry, whatever. Because the water side is very chemistry heavy, and the wastewater side is very microbiology heavy, but also with that microbiology, we also have to be chemistry intensive to make that work. So, but a lot of it is learn on the fly. You know, and it really, you gotta have good people. I was fortunate when I got into the industry, I had people that wanted to pass on their knowledge, and I've always just tried to carry that through.
And experience is priceless.
Yeah.
Actually experiencing it.
I mean, as operators, we don't wanna have plant upsets, but plant upset is the best way to learn. I mean, seriously.
Make mistakes.
So once the adequate contact time in the aeration basin has been achieved, the mixed liquor then moves off into the secondary clarifier, which is in the very center there. You know, that's the lucid dark water that you see. And that's really not black, that's just an illusion that you get from a camera. But it's really like, you know, I mean, I'm sure everybody here, being from where we're at, everybody at some point has gone through a swampy area. And you know, you see that like brownish, it's not clear, but it's not dirty, you know, and that's really what we look for there. The very, very center where it looks like your latte that you had this morning with the foam, that's actually where the mixed liquor out of the aeration basin is coming up in the middle, and then it all settles out. Once that all settles out, it goes over the weirs, and this is actually the water at the Ave plant coming out of the clarifier, so it's not very dirty at all at that point. As the slide says, if all the parameters leading up to it were maintained in balance with one another, most of the suspended solids will settle to the bottom while the clear supernate flows over the launders and off to the next portion of the process. And as you guys have probably already realized, the actual wastewater treatment is way more involved than the water treatment. So the settled solids in the clarifier now have to be managed. So a portion of those solids, called return activated sludge, are placed back into the aeration basin, and that's actually the RAS at the Ave plant going back into the aeration basin. So, and then another portion would have to be removed, otherwise they would just continue to build up and build up and build up and build up. They'd become too thick and it would overwhelm the treatment. So these solids go to the digester where we thicken them until our process can no longer handle them. We then have them hauled by a vendor who processes solids for land application, fertilizer, or landfill cover. And this little video of how that works.
So the system isn't overpopulated with bacteria. This happens at a belt press, where the water is removed from the biomass. A polymer is added to the biomass, causing it to coagulate. Then a belt and a series of drums presses all the water out of the biomass. The dried biomass is now called biosolids. A conveyor belt takes the biosolids and loads it onto a truck to be taken to a landfill.
That's what you call sludge?
Yep, that's sludge hauling, and we don't do that in-house because we just don't produce enough for that to be cost effective yet. Most places our size do not do that on site. Now, like for instance, the Collier County plants, the South plant that is a 16 million gallon a day plant, they have 5 of those belt presses on site and 3 run 24 hours a day. So, and we have a 221 acre parcel that is permitted for us to do this on, but determined that it's just not cost effective between all the regulatory side of it and what it would really cost to do it. It's still cheaper for us to call Carl and have them come haul it and they process it
Has some
themselves.
heck of oranges though.
Right?
Good stuff.
So once that water left the clarifier through the launders, moves on to the traveling bridge sand filters, and the filters provide a final polishing of the water, removing most suspended solids that make it past the clarifier.
You got a question back here, Sean? Go ahead.
Oh.
Priscilla.
Sorry, I'm just full of questions today.
No, that's fine. I'll talk about this all day long.
I know.
So I know you guys just went through an expansion at build out of 9 to 11,000, whatever it ends up being. Do you see one of these sludge processing, and what was your current expansion for, just to maintain what you guys, the 2,000 homes plus CCPS?
The current expansion was just to house the maintenance department, pretty much. We had no place to work on our equipment or work on any of the equipment. We were based out of the operations building.
Got it.
So what they just built was a maintenance building.
Which meant I had no office. My office has been my kitchen table for 3 years.
So now